We're joined now in the studio by Sam Chester, analyst at investment management firm Clarity Capital, and I-24 News reporter Daniel Roth for a discussion on crude oil. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, so given that the Arab Gulf countries are very heavily dependent on gas and oil industry, to what extent is the lower price of oil impacting their economy?
So I think that you're seeing countries in the Gulf, Kuwait most prominently, Oman, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and others, they're looking to reduce the subsidies, the cradle-to-the-grave subsidies that all of these governments give to their citizens, mostly to ensure that through having a strong welfare state, the citizens will stay in line and respect government wishes. They're beginning discussions, we've seen these in the last few weeks, principally again in those three smaller Arab Gulf countries, to reduce these subsidies, and it seems to be that perhaps it's happening in response to the drop in oil prices. One example I can give you, in Kuwait, for instance, they announced just 3 weeks ago that they're going to be lowering the fuel and the gas subsidies, and this could raise for consumer prices up to 3 times basic prices such as gas for your home, the price of fuel at the tank, and airplane prices as well.
These countries are basking in money, at least from our perspective, right? They have tremendous amount of money that they can essentially invest in infrastructure, you name it. And for that matter, there's a couple of the countries in the Gulf that where the majority of the people who live there are foreign workers. To what extent, are these countries really in danger, so to speak, of running out of money?
So it's not necessarily a question of running out of money. Right now you're seeing that the global price of oil is about $85 a gallon. And economists who study this closely have said, looking at the particular Gulf countries, they have different red lines, where if the price of oil dropped below that line, it would really hurt their national budget. For some of those countries, the red line is approaching when global oil is at 85, but for most of them it isn't. So the money is still there. Where really this crimps the development in these countries is when you look at the economic reform policies that they're trying to put into place, where they're trying to develop their economies, diversify their economies, create jobs for local citizens, and subsidies are really hurting that, and then lower oil obviously hurts that as well. So it's diversifying their economy, it's creating jobs, and then it's also motivating the citizens to get involved in these new sectors that they're developing, which is difficult when the subsidies are in place.
Right. The public sectors in some of these countries specifically are just humongous, right? There's a lot of people who actually work in these countries that basically work for the government. So, in terms of the reform succeeding, what does it take?
So I think what you pointed out is really important, which is the tremendous size of the labor force that's working in the public sector is a tremendous challenge to development in these countries. Saudi Arabia has been focusing for the last 3 years on that challenge. As a result, Saudi Arabia, while recognizing that subsidies are really hurting their local economy, has yet to announce any of the dramatic moves we've been seeing in other countries. The reason I mention that is that until Saudi Arabia really takes a step forward and says we're going to reduce our subsidies, like Kuwait is starting to do, like Oman is starting to do, you're not going to see the region as a whole really follow step. Because Saudi Arabia, ultimately, it's the largest economy there, it's the leader, and the other countries are going to look to Saudi Arabia to say when will they reduce their subsidies, and we'll follow suit.
Okay. Well, Sam Chester, we're going to move over here to the other side of the table, to Daniel Roth. Thanks for joining us.
How's it going?
Good. I just want to have a different discussion here, still on the topic of crude oil, but Russia.
Russia, yes.
President Vladimir Putin today had his annual address, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Today was the State of the Union in Russia, the State of the Nation.
Right.
Russia's had a very bad year, Sanctions have done minor damage, but some damage to their economy. The ruble has dropped around 40%, and guess what? Global oil has dropped around 40%. Oil and Russian wealth go together hand in hand. This is just a fact. 50% of Russia's budget is based on oil sales. 68% of their exports is oil and natural gas.
Of course, what we just saw, the Gulf countries are a similar situation. Russia has other things going on, correct? There's the Western sanctions.
Right. The sanctions are, I shouldn't understate the impact of the sanctions. It is important in this game, and you're seeing that these two impacts both coming from the West. It's North American natural gas, predominantly North American oil and natural gas flooding the market, as well as Western sanctions. These are the two things hitting Russia hard. And of course, Putin, in his speech today, actually sort of laid the blame not on oil, not on global economic realities, but on Western sanctions, on Western moves against him. Let's take a look at one of these sound bites.
Okay, let's see.
Speaking of the sanctions, this is not just a nervous reaction of the United States and their allies to our stance in regards to the events and coup in Ukraine. Not even in regard to the so-called Crimean Spring. I am certain that if all this did not take place, they would come up with another reason to control Russia's growing capabilities, to influence it, or even better, use it for its own goals.
Interesting. I mean, it seems like Putin doesn't stop, but flexing his muscles and showing how great he is, and he doesn't really step back. It seems things are falling apart in the country. A lot of people, they don't have what to eat.
I would just jump in. I think to compare it to the Gulf in the way that you said, I think that the Gulf, in succeeding to make politics not the center of the story, they're not doing any of the moves that you see coming out of Russia, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's elsewhere. That's one of the efforts that's allowed them to really focus on economic development and allowed them to perhaps even reduce the subsidies, as we discussed earlier. So by focusing really on the economics and trying to push the politics aside, an area in which Russia clearly hasn't succeeded.
Right. Russia, I mean, Putin is putting politics front and center here. He used this opportunity today to make this address and say, look, it may seem like everything's falling apart around you, but it's not. We're strong. We're the strongest in the world, even.
Since we are talking about the address, I mean, what are some of the things that he promised? Are just empty promises? Did he come out with anything really, interesting here?
Well, it's interesting is in the heart of the beholder, in the eyes of the beholder. It's the same as any politician's national address. He's making promises for education money, for building infrastructure for entrepreneurship. An interesting difference between the U.S. and Russia is that here, when Putin is promising reforms, he's promising to re-centralize things that had been decentralized over the last few decades, to re-centralize, as in his words, to make things less inefficient. Something that he put a lot of blame on the slowdown in the economy, on these inefficiencies in the economy. So it's interesting as insofar as political speeches are interesting.
I'd say one of the most interesting events coming out of all of this is just seeing how different powers are coming closer together as others are going apart, in terms of Russia and the EU, in terms of Russia going towards Turkey now with the South Stream pipeline essentially being canceled. Where do you guys see all of this heading?
I would add that the market is always a great indicator. If you look at how the markets reacted to Russia in the early to mid-90s, when Russia was liberalizing and it was doing the opposite of the moves that Putin is putting to place now, the markets really embraced Russia, and FDI and money was pouring in. And you're seeing the opposite happen now. So if you look at a number of different leading indicators from the markets, that gives as good a commentary as anything what both corporations and many countries in the West think about Putin's speech.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, a few weeks ago, Putin actually said he won't step down until 2024, or rather, he put it, I will step down in 2024. This is his worst nightmare. The ruble is tumbling, oil is tumbling, the economy is shaking around him, and so I think I think we need to keep our eyes on Russia, certainly.
Right. Well, on the topic of crude oil, let's take it a little closer to home. Why don't you tell us about what happened in southern Israel today?
Yeah, this morning, down south in the Negev desert, an oil pipeline leaked into a national park. Millions of liters of oil falling, spreading across this national...
Foul play, or...?
No, it doesn't look like it. The investigators say it was a mistake, which is actually scarier when you think about it. When you think about it, that there's these oil pipelines all around us, and they could leak at any time. This is the kind of thing that's in the argument about the Keystone Pipeline. This is what we're seeing today in southern. It could take months or years
we actually see now what actually happened in terms of the oil spill.
Right.
The interesting thing is, of course, that Israel has a central position in terms of the Levant, so to speak, with pipelines going from Egypt to Jordan to. I mean, Israel has a very, very powerful seat here in that sense.
It has the potential, certainly.
But
this used to be a pipeline for Iranian oil to Europe, and this actually is now just an internal Israeli pipeline for bringing oil north. So again, it's a very scary prospect to see this kind of accident take place. It's a very scary prospect.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Daniel Roth, for your comments on the oil spill. And, of course, Sam Chester from Clarity Capital, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
That is the end of our Economy Magazine. I am Benjamin Chong-Faris. Thanks for watching, and join us again tomorrow.